I heard and I listened to and I respect Senator Harris. But, you know, we all know that 30 seconds to 60 seconds on a campaign debate exchange can't do justice to a lifetime committed to civil rights. I want to be absolutely clear about my record and position on racial justice, including busing. I never, ever opposed voluntary busing.
Joe Biden back on the campaign trail attempting to clarify his commitment to civil rights there. The former vice president has come under fire for his relationship with two segregationist senators for opposing busing as a way to desegregate schools, most pointedly by California Democratic Senator Kamala Harris in what became an instantly indelible moment from last night's debate.
I do not believe you are a racist. And I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Here with us tonight, Jackie Alemany, political reporter for The Washington Post, author of the paper's morning newsletter, Power Up. Usually comes out at the same time we're powering down. And A.B. Stoddard, columnist and associate editor at Real Clear Politics. Welcome to you both. A.B., there's that cruel phrase in a cruel business about politics. If you're explaining, you're losing. Joe Biden spent the day explaining. Where would you put the Joe Biden campaign right about now?
I do not think it's a fatal blow because it is still early. But, Brian, he had a bad night, and I did not think his cleanup today was effective. It fell very flat. He did explain his long record of protecting civil rights and working passionately to defend them. But his other explanation about busing and his kind of trying to use the Obama years to kind of get mad and get fired up was not really well received in the room. And it just is, he's not using his strength. He seemed overwhelmed by the Democratic Party of 2019 last night. He seemed defensive. His strength is his electability. It's why he's polling more than 50% and 23% field with non-white voters. People believe he could step in on day one or yesterday and do the job better, even if he napped for 4 years with a staff that would be better for this country than Donald Trump's presidency. He didn't say that last night. He's not telling the voters this is no time for on-the-job training, which is how Speaker Pelosi got elected to her speakership a second time. So unless he tells the voters this is what I have over these other new young folks with their different ideas, he's going to look like he looked last night, insecure and overwhelmed.
Beautifully said. Jackie, you wrote beautifully about what we witnessed last night, that Senator Harris not only took the torch from Joe Biden, she stole his thunder right there on the stage as we all watched. Can he succeed if he doesn't come at a new way of owning the past? I suppose he runs the risk of running out of ways to say, you had to be there.
Yeah, I think he is in a tough position, right? Because he doesn't want to be constantly apologizing for all of his past positions. But at the same time, he was a stark contrast to someone like Mayor Pete, who just embraced accountability and responsibility. And it was pretty refreshing, at least according to some of the focus groups that I was listening to throughout the night. But again, you know, it's so difficult to make predictions right now. But it seems that Joe Biden really does seem to lack a vision. He spent the day talking about busing, not talking about a criminal justice reform platform or his vision for what he wants the presidency to look like. And I think if he especially is going to be running on this idea of electability, he needs to, come up with a more salient vision for what, you know, a Biden 2020 White House is going to look like.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.